Sal Carey, the operations manager. I will be taking the roll call for City Clerk Ashley McDonough. Chairman Shaw Brule. Here. Member Randy Stout.
Here.
Member Lori Simpson.
Here.
Member Mike Ferez.
Here.
Member Ronald McDonald.
Here.
City Attorney Nancy Meyer.
Here.
Okay, thank you. All right, a little bit of old business. We have board minutes to review, and it's been a minute since we've been together, guys, so we have two of them. Any discussion regarding the first one? Let's go through from March 11th, 2025. If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and the second would be for November 12th, 2025. Any discussion? If not, a motion.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
I'll take a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, jumping right into it. Miss Nancy, you have the floor. Pardon me? I can't. I'm trying to catch up. This is why I don't like doing it this way. Oh, comments in general public? We don't have. Okay. Do I have any comments from the general public?
And you do have public here.
Oh, there's two. Yes. They just have fancy blue shirts. We can't really tell. So
They don't look general.
Exactly.
They're not going to let this go.
All right.
Any comments from the board?
And then any comments from the board regarding anything before we get into it?
Regarding,
Not agenda.
Not agenda based.
well, I think you covered, you hinted at, there's a lot of stuff that we've discussed in here, that we wanted to try and bring forward that I wanted to, just wanted to see if we were still on the plan for that. I know that most importantly for me, it was the boat covers.
And
I
those
know
were
we talked about it.
council will talk about that. That was on my to-do list to draft. I apologize. There's a few things we found recently when we were putting together a nice spreadsheet to help the city manager and I not lose things that did get fall through the cracks. So that is on there. Also will be coming forward.
Yeah, that was my question too. Is I was wondering where we were with the boat covers, if that was approved or.
I suspect it will be shortly. They were also in favor of the idea.
And I have a non-agenda question. We're getting ready to be faced with a tremendous financial loss. Our governor is about to sign into law, the Homestead Act. So we're going to be losing all of that tax revenue that we have for people who own their homes. Right now we have residential, multifamily, we have commercial and industrial zone. But we have a lot of crossover because we have a lot of people that are renting their properties out on a day basis or a week basis. And we don't seem to have any structure for that whatsoever. We don't have a permitting structure for it. We don't have an inspection structure for it. And it seems that if we're going to have to find a way to supplement, sorry about the voice, guys, supplement our income because of the loss of all the homestead income we're going to have, that we really should be looking into how do we charge for this? I mean, I've got two neighbors that are putting their properties out on a regular basis, and they'll rent it for the weekend or they rent it for the week. Well, that's the same as a hotel, but it's in a residential area, but it's operating not as residential, it's operating as a business. So how do we classify this so that we're not taken advantage of? And also some protection for people coming into our community, because I think at least at the minimum we should have the fire marshal inspecting every one of these properties to make sure we're not having people go into black mold or places with no carbon monoxide. We don't have any rules. We don't have any structure whatsoever. And I would like to suggest that we either form a committee or do something to turn this day rental into quasi business. They have to have a business license. They got to have an inspection, something like that.
You were correct on all that. and we can do that. We don't need necessarily a committee. I've spoken about this topic with Veronica in the past and prior city managers. We have not had this conversation yet. There is a preemption. There's certain things we cannot regulate they're called short-term rentals, but there's a lot you can do, and you can you can fine, you can inspect, you can have certain requirements for the things you're talking about. So it's just a product of revising your code and adding that in there.
Well, that house, if you're going to be using that, all of a sudden it's a business.
It is.
It is no longer just a residential.
You were-
So we're taxing them as if it was a regular house, but it's not a regular house anymore.
And most of the municipalities that I deal with that do have regulations for short-term rentals, there's registration fees. They, obviously they have the fire inspection, like you were talking about. There are things you definitely can do to regulate. It's not going to be it's not like a money maker per se, but it is a very wise idea. So you do have the control over that. It's for safety reasons. Making sure there's an evacuation chart in this house from someone that's not from Florida and who there's a storm.
And we
Simple
talked
things like
about
that.
We talked about that and putting that verbiage in
So
to have
there's a
some
lot
things
you can
required.
do. There's a few things you can't do because the state's preempted it, but there's a lot you can do to regulate that. It's just a matter. I'll talk with the city manager and we'll bring that.
See if we can move that forward.
It's an idea that I've been a fan of since I started here.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't want to compete with the investors that are putting money into rental properties here. And all of a sudden we're saying, well, we're going to take it away from you, the hotel owners and everybody else. We're going to let these individuals take and steal your business. And yet we're not protecting you in the way we should.
So part of that is the responsibility of the city itself in the fact that, and I'm one of those people that steals those people's business. Ron, I appreciate that. I own 4 Airbnbs as well as regular long-term rentals as well. But the cities that I'm in with, like Alachua County, as far as Gainesville, I have one in Orlando. All of those cities actually go to Airbnb and VRBO, and they apply their tax to that, which I then pass on to my actual consumers that stay there. So we don't have that in the city, and I actually brought that forth and said, hey, we're not charging a city tax. Pasco County gets their pound of flesh every single time somebody rents my house. So, but we don't take it here. So we need to put it together here locally and then pass that information on to the companies that do that, Airbnb, VRBO, whatever the ones you're using, and then they will tax accordingly, and then the city will get compensated. So
and Pasco County paying attention to the tax records. They should be paying attention to Airbnb, VRBO, all of those places because those properties don't qualify as homestead.
Correct.
So you can't homestead a property you're renting out like that. And they do pay some attention to it because we know some folks that have gotten hit by doing that and finally got caught and needed to switch their homestead. And as such, then, if that does get voted in, the homestead change does get voted in, it wouldn't pertain to those dwellings. So all of those Airbnb properties aren't going to get the homestead break on the taxes.
And the city does charge the business tax, which we pay. We do pay that. So, and the city's pretty good at catching it because the residents are just like yourself. If it's next door to my house, the city should know that somebody's getting paid for it. I get it 100%. And I gladly pay my portion of it when I do it. So that's the way it should be done correctly. But you're right. There's a lot of it that's done kind of under the table, and it's not the right way to do things. 100%. And I agree, Nancy. We should definitely look into that.
So I'll be with the city manager and bring it. We'll work together on that.
Very good. Very good.
Anything else?
Now, the only thing we can regulate. How do we regulate in any way all these young people with now these new electric bikes that are screaming up and down our sidewalks? And man, I almost got run over by 2 very young gentlemen on these electric bikes doing 25 miles an hour on the sidewalk.
That's a policing standard. It doesn't really have to. We don't need an ordinance for that. Bicycles aren't even technically supposed to be on a sidewalk. They're supposed to be using the road the way the road is supposed to be used. And the state is already pushing through legislation to govern to roll those electric bikes into motor vehicles.
And they are motorized vehicles, no matter how you look at them.
Well, the problem is that our rules currently for DOT pertaining to things like mopeds and small scooters, they have a CC limit. So below a certain CC, they don't require a license. They don't require any of the additional requirements. Electric doesn't. They don't have a CC, so they're skirting those rules. It's kind of the same with the waterways. A lot of these motorized surfboards, e-foils, things like that originally came out. There was no governance for them. And now the state has passed, actually federally, they've passed requirements that if it has a motor of any kind whatsoever, it has to have FL numbers. It has to have registration. It has to be governed so that it falls under the standard rules. And I think that's what's going to happen. Governance is going to come down from the state level on the e-bikes. They're already starting to push that. Lots of municipalities are starting to adopt, but they're kind of adopting early for something that I think the state is going to push anyway. That we're definitely going to get requirements, but it's already against a policing standard. If they're traveling down a sidewalk on something motorized, they're already violating a rule. It would be honest to talk with the police department about. They need to start citing those kids. They need to pull those kids off those bikes and take them home and explain to the parents that here's a citation for letting this kid ride this on. Here's your first warning. If he gets caught again, it's going to be a citation. But that would be a policing matter because the only place that we would really govern it, I think, during ordinance, and Nancy, you have to tell me that, but would be the bike path. Like the bike path that runs down across Waterfront Park and all the way down to the Energy Center would really be the only thing I would think that we would govern, because everything else would fall on DOT, would fall on the road and become purview to the police department. We could write an ordinance that says on a city bike path, you can't use an electric. And a lot of places are doing that. There's classifications of electric bikes. So you have pedal assist bikes that are class 1. And then they work their way all the way up to a class 3, which has a button and no pedals, and it's effectively a dirt bike. It's a motorcycle. Most places that have actual bike paths or bike trails for off-road bikes for mountain biking, you can't use anything above a class 1. Class 1 bikes are the only thing allowed on those paths by ordinance for whoever governs those paths. It says that it's got to just be pedal assist then, and most people aren't going to ride a pedal assist bike to 25 miles an hour. You're still pedaling your butt off to get one of those to that speed. But it's the kids that have the ones that look like dirt bikes. They've got a throttle, and you just hit the button and go 25 miles an hour. Those are the ones that the police department should be policing, because now you're operating effectively a low-speed vehicle. Just like a golf cart, you're operating a low-speed vehicle on a sidewalk. If one of us drove our golf cart down the sidewalk at 25 miles an hour, the police would certainly pull us over and ask us which of our waterfront establishments we'd been drinking at. That's really, I think, something more of guidance from probably the city and city management to talk to the PD about. We want to see this see this governed the way that it's supposed to be governed. Those things shouldn't be. They should be operated like bicycles, and that means they follow traffic rules. And if they're doing that, then they fall under traffic rules from the PD. Would be my take. That'd be my assumption.
I know in our neighborhood we have a lot of underage kids driving around really fast in golf carts.
And we already have an
And
ordinance
they have
for that.
no idea what the laws are. They've never taken a driving course, so they're going to get hit. But
Anything else? Okay. Now moving along to our agenda. Miss Nancy, number 2.
I'm here, but this is really Tammy's show today.
Tammy wants to run the show today.
Tammy's going to do a lot of talking.
I need support from my friends today, so we have a lot of material, and thank you all for taking the time to review everything. I know it's quite lengthy. So our first discussion is going to be regarding recreational vehicles, recreational vehicle type, other types of recreational vehicles, and the parking standards within the city. The purpose of our discussion is to get your input on whether the city should consider modifying those regulations that govern recreational vehicle and watercraft parking. So this is a policy discussion only. We do have some sort of an application. I'm not as familiar with the process for requesting a zoning text amendment by a private entity in the city. So we have that, but we're not going to discuss that specifically today. It's going to be more of a global discussion. And so maybe you'll come out of this with even a hybrid. Maybe you'll want to do one approach and then part of another approach, but we'll get there. eventually. So our next slide is, so this discussion was prompted by a request from the Harborpointe Homeowners Association regarding alternative parking standards within their subdivision. And while that request originated from a specific neighborhood, the city felt that it kind of raised a broader question regarding whether the city's current regulations provide sufficient flexibility to address unique neighborhood conditions. So today we're seeking that guidance. If the city decides to move forward, any future amendment would require formal public hearings before the Planning and Zoning Board and also for City Council. And the key question that we're asking today is whether the city should consider a mechanism for either changing their standards globally or area-specific parking standards. Next one. Oops. Did you skip one?
I went from
That's
standards
it.
to this one.
The current citywide standards. There you go.
Okay.
So currently, the city's regulations in this regard are applied uniformly across all properties, all residential zoning districts in the city. That's in section 127-92 part F, and it generally requires that recreational vehicles, boats, trailers, and similar equipment are stored inside or in rear yard areas. Parking in front yards is restricted, and driveway parking is limited to 24 hours for loading and unloading of those vehicles. Habitation is prohibited, and the current regulations are straightforward and they're easy to administer because the same standards apply across the city. Next one. So as an example, we're going to look at the Harborpointe neighborhood, which possesses several characteristics that distinguish it from other neighborhoods within the city. It's a waterfront community. It has a high prevalence of boat ownership. The subdivision has a gated entrance, so there's limited external visibility into the neighborhood. And several lots have constrained side yard areas, kind of irregularly shaped lots. And these characteristics have prompted this discussion and whether the neighborhoods like this might warrant consideration for alternative parking standards. And the question for the board is whether physical characteristics such as these can be a factor in developing future regulations for the city. Next one. So part of the recreational vehicles and parking of recreational vehicles and boats, generally the impacts are very localized in nature. Those impacts typically relate to neighborhood appearance, impacts on adjacent properties, what the streetscape character looks like, and overall what the resident expectations are for standards within their neighborhood. And like issues such as density or traffic generation or infrastructure capacity, which could be felt outside of a neighborhood, this is more localized within an immediate neighborhood. So if the impacts are localized, should regulations also have the ability to be localized under certain circumstances? That's just a question for you to think about. Next slide, please. The staff has identified 4 potential approaches just to triangulate and think about as you're considering these types of amendments. So these range from the city's existing standards, so maintaining what's on the book today, so kind of a no change approach, all the way up to developing very specific standards for specific areas. So, and the purpose of the next few slides is not to advocate for any particular approach. We're just kind of laying it out there, and this is going to be a robust discussion, I'm sure. And we'll take back what information we have for staff that will have something ready for you to look at for the future date. So the next slide, please. The first approach is no change. You would maintain the city's existing citywide standards. The advantage of that is that it's uniform across the city. There's consistent enforcement, and there's no precedent concerns. You have what you have, and that's what everybody knows that they need to address. It doesn't address those neighborhood-specific concerns or characteristics, and there's limited flexibility because of that.
Tammy,
Next slide, please.
Tammy, can you turn your mic on? Turn the mic on.
I'm sorry.
Nope, that's okay. Thank you.
good with that. Next slide, please. So approach number 2 is a citywide amendment. So that's looking at modifying your parking standards for all residential districts. So I don't know if somebody was discussing earlier that there might have been something that you were looking to change relative to recreational vehicle parking.
What I remember, and our general public might be able to help me if they were part of it. I do have on my to-do list, but I won't bring up all my to-do list items today, but allowing, I think, parking in the front. Same time frames of parking in the front if there was like proper coverage over. I think it was for boats though.
We had some discussions on it that there has been formula kind of waiting.
Yeah, and that's why I might.
This is probably a good
Yeah.
predecessor to have that conversation.
There was some conversations. I just can't remember the details of them.
Okay.
But,
So
yeah.
we'll go through all
And
of
you
these
guys might too,
approaches,
'cause we
and
talked
then
about it
we
here.
can dig into it in the discussion. So again, the citywide amendment would apply to your parking standards on the books today. So making modifications to those. The advantages, that's simple administration. Oh, I wonder why that's not the same as what anyway, listen to me and don't look at that one. Simple administration, a consistent application. The challenge is that, it's not as flexible because it's citywide. And there could be potential impacts to neighborhoods that are not seeking that change. They may be happy with what's on the books today. Next slide, please. Approach number 3 is a context-based criteria. So it would allow flexibility where their objective criteria is met. So if you have like certain neighborhoods that have certain characteristics, you could codify that in your code, and those neighborhoods would be able to tap into certain regulations that were established under this. So it's a targeted approach, but it does require eligibility standards. So that might take some doing to come up with those. And the administration for that purpose is a little more complex. And the last approach is essentially what the Harborpointe neighborhood is looking for, and that would be a geographically defined overlay that would have modified standards. It would be highly targeted to a particular area, to those specific conditions, but the citywide standards would remain for everybody else within the city. The challenges that you would need to have, again, eligibility criteria. It requires that legislative action for each neighborhood that wants to come in and get that overlay. And there's the potential for future requests from other neighborhoods. And the next slide, please. Oh, this is not picking up the latest. I'm not really sure it's not picking up the latest application or
This
version.
is not the latest version.
You know what I'm thinking is that maybe the link is not updated. So
Hold on.
okay, don't show that anymore then, because it's just a boilerplate. That was
Okay, give me a second. Okay. There was different files on here, so I can probably see if I can pull up the other one.
Let me see if I can just email this to you. Here it is. And then I'll just keep talking while you're. Thank you, Sal. I was wondering why I didn't think that link would be affected. Okay, so issues for board discussion. See if I can do 2 things at one time, which is probably doubtful.
You talk and Sean will act out.
True story. Trades.
Sent to Sal. Okay, it's coming now, Sal. And I'll just carry on. So issues for the board discussion include the context sensitivity, so whether unique physical conditions justify a deviation from your uniform regulations today. Neighborhood support, so for instance, if a neighborhood comes in and wants to have an overlay district, what's the level of support that you'd need? Would it be 60% of the homeowners within an area or something less, 50%? Precedent, you'd have to consider the potential applicability to other similarly situated neighborhoods. So if one neighborhood gets it, might be
conceivable that other neighborhoods would come forward to get that overlay as well. Enforceability, the ability to administer, monitor, and enforce area-specific standards. With a homeowners association, you can always be more restrictive, but you can't be less restrictive, and that's why the city would need to be able to continue enforcing its policies relative to, and that would need to be legislatively adopted, and that would be the city's policy in that overlay area. And then consistency and fairness, whether similar situations should be treated similarly throughout the city. And so the board direction that we're asking for today is, should the city consider modifying its parking regulations? If so, should those modifications be citywide? Should they be based on objective eligibility criteria, or should they be limited to special areas such as an overlay district? Should the eligibility criteria be established for any specific, any area-specific approach? What role should neighborhood support play in evaluating those future requests? And are there specific parking standards that warrant further evaluation? The next step would be to take your information, develop that into some proposed regulations, and then processing those through a planning and zoning board public hearing and also city council public hearings for consideration. And that concludes it. So probably don't pull it up, and I do have a copy of the standards in front of me too, if anybody has any questions. Yes, sir.
Can you kind of lay out what the existing ordinance is for parking situations?
Yes. And when Sal gets in, he can pull it up too. So no boats, watercraft, trailers, or major recreational equipment shall be permitted to be parked or stored in any residential driveway or yard forward of the dwelling.
Forward, I'm sorry.
Forward of the dwelling. So in the front
Like
yard.
not the driveways.
In the front yard. Or any vacant lot zoned for residential use. Boats, I'll just say boats and RVs, may be parked or stored on a side yard or rear yard of residential property. However, the parking or storage of boats or RVs shall be no closer to a street or the road than the front of the dwelling. So you need to be behind the front of the facade, front facade. No RV or boat shall be stored on a partial lot or a non-contiguous segment of a residential lot situated between the public right-of-way and a body of water. So I guess that's when you have your front yard maybe crosses the road and goes like on Grand Boulevard, perhaps. There's provisions for state statutes, so of course you can follow any state statutes related to this. No major recreational equipment is hereby, what's defined is that it's travel trailers, pickup campers, or coaches designed to be mounted on automotive vehicles, motorized dwellings, tent trailers, houseboats, and the like. So recreational vehicles. And no boats or any of those vehicles can be used for habitation. No sleeping, no housekeeping, whether it's parked or stored anywhere on the property. So it's just not allowed. And the last one is no RVs, boats, other vehicles shall be parked or stored on any lot in a residential district within a required front yard, provided, however, that such may be parked anywhere on residential premises for a period not to exceed 24 hours during loading or unloading.
Somewhere in there, I thought you said that can't be parked in the backyard.
No.
Or
No,
side
just
yard.
in the front yard.
Front yard.
What we were saying about backyards and side yards.
You can park backyards and side yards, but you can't park forward of the front facade.
But you said more than that. You
Well,
said something
unless
about backyards.
there's also
and side.
corners, so there's also some special exceptions. Corners, because you don't have
Corners are front yards.
corners or front yards,
Two
but
fronts.
then that makes between the property and the water
Is that
a
the latest
side
one?
yard setback on the one side, depending on the location of it. And that's had some issues in the past too with people that there wasn't a good place for them to put it, that it didn't put it. next to the water, and it was too close to the water, but kind of in a front yard. There's some corners where canals come right up to the abutting road, and that creates yet another location that's been an issue in the past. So I think before I got on B&Z, but I think they've tried to address all of those weird locations in that ordinance, which is why it's kind of disjointed. It's got a lot of little pieces.
Yeah, but it does state specifically that you may be parked in the front or side yard. However, that equipment shall be no closer to a street than the front of a dwelling, which feels repetitive.
It does.
Is it repetitive? Okay. And when you encounter those things in codes, it makes you wonder, am I reading that right, or is there something I'm missing? So that's why having clear standards is helpful. But there's code work, always needs to be code work, but maybe that's something that you can fix.
So this whole question has come up because Point Alexis is asking the questions. Harborpointe. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
Harborpointe had come forward to the city and asking for a special overlay just for their.
Are they a homeowners association?
Yes,
They are.
they're a
So-
master and
And they had
preventing
some,
them from just having their HOA add a new restriction?
it can't be less than. It has to be more restrictive than what the city already adopts.
They want to let.
Or they want to make it less?
yeah,
They want to allow
they wanna
people
allow
to
them.
buy. They want to allow people to do things that our current code says we can't.
So this was already brought to the board. We had this discussion. I don't know if you guys remember this. Lori probably remembers this. We actually sat, and Eric, I believe you were here as well, and so was a couple other council members. And there was discussion about a very long, lengthy discussion regarding the idea of modifying the code from 24 hours to, the initial part of the discussion was to making it so we would get rid of that rule completely. Because I remember I was very adamant personally as a real estate broker that would create blight. It could very easily create blight in the city and devalue a lot of properties, which we don't want to devalue properties. We want to raise property values and keep increasing our tax base, especially with the new thing with DeSantis doing. So, and I think had been a consensus that we had discussed that we would allow it up to so many days, which is almost very similar to the application we're looking at. I think it was 4 or 5 days or 6 days or something along those lines, not to exceed a certain amount of days in the month.
They were requesting up to 6 consecutive days.
Which I think is almost exactly the same thing we had discussed here. And the reason why some of the public had come to us and said that, we said, well, that's fine. Just park your trailer in the driveway for the weekend or your boat in the driveway for the weekend. They said, well, what about people who you're getting your boat ready for scallop season. You got to change the oil in your lower unit. There's a week process involved. Like, okay, well, that makes sense. We just don't want to see them sitting in their yards for 3 weeks at a time or something like that. And that discussion had been made, and then I think we tabled it because we had so many other things going on. So,
And I'll say from my notes from the council discussion, there wasn't a change in my notes, or wasn't a change in the time frame. It was just a change in allowing parking in the front under certain conditions, like proper operable vehicle, that kind of thing.
okay. So it's like we've had this, we're going back to the same thing,
Yes.
but now somebody's brought it to their attention and they're requesting a change. And so we'd have to modify.
What was the conclusion of your discussion when you had it last?
I don't have notes from planning and zoning. My notes are from when council discussed it. It was not a change in time frame, at least in my written notes. It was just to allow parking in the front. And I'm thinking more boat, because I remember talking about the cover of the boat, but RV I'm sure was included in that too, as long as it's operable and in good condition, that kind of thing. But that
Probably on the tail of that discussion, this neighborhood says, well, we're kind of uniquely situated. Perhaps that's something that we could accomplish and it wouldn't be objectionable to the property owners within that neighborhood. And so they're just asking for essentially what you were discussing, but they would have support with their limited amount of, I think there's 50 lots out there.
So I think from your perspective today, because we're not addressing the application itself.
Sure.
Yes, it's been discussed. Let's just discuss it again. Have some different minds, some different thoughts maybe. Let's take those notes of what you guys think would be reasonable and the right way to move forward, and then we can let Tammy move forward.
If you're thinking of more global changes to the code itself, then we can address those. And if you want to have that property owner come back in for a formal hearing process, then that's something you can also discuss.
I think yes, an HOA, the deed restrictions can't be less than the city ordinance.
They can
less
be more restrictive,
but
but
not,
not less.
but not less. Now, can the overlay that you're talking about, can that be less?
Yes, because it would be adopted by the city. It would be city
Yeah.
regulations.
The overlay could be less than the city.
Yeah,
Okay.
because the city would be adopting it as
The
opposed
city
to
has adopted
HOA.
that particular location that they're talking about.
It would
Kinda
be
like the
it would be a
waterfront.
zoning standard, special zoning standards for that particular area.
Mr. Mayor.
Chris Mayer, 4591 Harborpointe Drive. I am one of those residents of Harborpointe, and I know that I was paying attention to the leadership in the neighborhood, and they want to change this. They've got a couple guys that have really nice coaches that bring them in there for a week to get them ready to go out and do things, and they also have some very nice boats. I don't know of any junky boats that are in there right now. They're very nice boats they bring in for 5 or 6 days before they take them out. So I'm for it. I think it's a good idea. I think we should probably adopt it citywide, 5 to 6 days, because we're a boating community. And these people, and I'm not for putting that boat in the drive and leaving it there for 6 months and letting the cover rot off of it. But I think, somebody is responsible, takes, pride in their properties, and they have nice boats. I think we should give them the opportunity to be able to keep them there for a few days to get them ready or clean them up when they're done.
So my question from an HOA's perspective, from the HOA perspective is, did the HOA bring this to us after they discussed it with all of their residents and everybody out there is okay with it?
They had a vote. It's on according to the thing.
That I'm aware of in our neighborhood, there's only one person that is not for this. Everybody else that I'm aware of is for it. That's the numbers. Unless you know something I don't.
They have approval from 72%.
Yeah, so they had a
Whatever that-
couple nays, but
And I think the
hidden
ones
behind the
that
scenes.
did, I think between 72 and up to like 95%, they just didn't respond.
Yeah.
They just didn't even respond to the thing at all.
No response.
So we have a great approval for that.
Okay. And I think that speaks to what Tammy said was, if we're going to do this anywhere other than there, like I would be inclined to say yes to something like that when you're dealing with an HOA, because they have their own governance and it's on them to come up with that. If the HOA pulls their vote and comes to us and within their bylaws of how often something they would change in their HOA is covered, then I would be for, okay, that's their space. It's their gated space. They're doing their thing. Just like I wouldn't think that we would want to get involved in if they're going to change ARC regulations on how they can paint their stuff in their HOA. Like that doesn't seem like it's something that's really city purview. And since this is something more along the lines of, the reason we don't allow people to park things right now, the reason the ordinance is there is because people will park their boats permanently in their front yard, and then the tires go flat on the trailer, and then one motor's torn apart, and then they're there, for every 5 that are nice boats that are sitting there nice, because the city can't typically write an ordinance that governs what qualifies as nice. It's easier for us to just go, no, we can't do that. So since this is more of an aesthetics thing than it is a public safety thing or something like that, my thoughts would be that for an HOA, well, the HOA's main governance is aesthetics, is making sure that they maintain a certain style in there. If the vast majority of the people in there are cool with this and they like it and they want it, then I can't see where I would have a problem. Now, if we're talking about maybe adopting it more broadly within the city, that's when I think it's going to become a lot of work on Nancy to try and figure out and for you guys to figure out how to write verbiage that protects the aesthetic of the city without being overly restrictive and without being selective. It becomes a huge issue. I know that's been a running thing within the city, has been what citizens that just got a code enforcement ticket from we'll call selective enforcement. Well, you're telling me I can't have my trailer in the front yard, and that guy's had his boat in his front yard for 8 months, and it's growing weeds. Why is that allowed? And you're telling me I can't.
Well, we have a deluge of people still living in RVs in front of their properties that after the storm, and it's been 19 months.
Well, and we have
Or
folks that
longer.
are just like anything. We have folks that are taking advantage of that ordinance to put renters in RVs in neighborhoods that code enforcement is fighting with steadily to try to get that taken care of. And you're always going to have that. We're going to write ordinances and someone's going to be like, ooh, mousetrap. Let's figure out how to get around that. So I would say I like the idea of selective neighborhood where you can cordon off a very specific space. And even if it has to come back, either version, whether we decide that we suggest to council that they allow that one as its own, and we leave it that way, knowing that we're going to get future applications, but we've created a precedence for now you need to come back to the P&Z as a neighborhood with X number of members within that geographic space that want this and are willing to conform to the rules that are governing that. It can only be so long. It's got to be tagged. It's got to be operable. It can't be, obviously there's some caveat to that because you're talking about working on them. If you're going out there for 6 days and I've got to pull a power head off of something, the boat's not technically operable at that point, but the thing it's sitting on needs to be. So even if the boat is not operable and we're working on it, the trailer needs to be operable so that you can take it out of there and you can pull it away and put it somewhere else. Just like RVs, anything, it all needs to be capable of rolling and capable of moving. And so I could see either version of it. I could either see to me, the simpler version for us code wise is to grant it at the overlay level for them. And then knowing that we will, as a group, probably have to address this with other future neighborhoods. But we have a precedent for doing that on a one neighborhood at a time basis.
But I think the key to that is what you said is that it's an HOA. The governance is not the city's not it doesn't have to be the one that does that. We don't want to make code enforcement's job even harder than it already is. I mean, I wouldn't want his job on a bed, and whether it be Pat or anybody else in any other city in this state. I think the HOA is the key part, right? Somebody else is in charge of making sure that their citizens follow the rules. So we have it in place now at a city level, and we're still fighting it. So,
and if you do an overlay that like what has been proposed, if that's something that ends up happening, that will become city code, and
sure.
So it will be code enforcement. Now, an HOA obviously can still do their own enforcement that they do, but that will then become the city that's enforcing that in that area.
Won't that leave us open possibly to a future lawsuit from somebody else saying, aren't you being a little restrictive? You're allowing one group because they happen to have more money and have a better community to be able to do something, and because I don't have that kind of money to live in that community, you're going to penalize me and let him do it? That doesn't sound like a fair arrangement to me. I mean, oh, well, you're in an overlay because you have an HOA and you're in an expensive community. So guess what? You get away with it. But Joe over here, who needs to work on his boat for the weekend or for a week, and he lives in a smaller community that has no HOA, and we're going to say, no, you're going to pay a fine if you don't move your boat. It just doesn't seem like there's a balance here that we might not be facing some real issues in the
I
I don't
don't
know
know
that
that you need to have an HOA to be able, you just would need to have a certain level of support, not unlike when a city wants to build sidewalks in an area and maybe they're asking for 50% of property owners to say, yes, we want sidewalks before you go in and build them.
So if there's no HOA, who and how does the overlay district get? Who makes those
The
boundaries?
city.
The city.
The city and the
So-
and code enforcement would.
So could one single home request to be declared a neighborhood and have their own rules?
I think that typically you would probably look at a platted subdivision or maybe so for instance, Harborpointe is one cohesive unit with 50 lots or thereabouts.
Behind two gates.
Right.
But there might be other areas that are like I don't know, Port Richey Land Company volume edition 2 or something that you could square them off. Nancy, I don't know if you have experience in that area, but I think that
that's why you need the criteria. It would be
criteria.
like anything that's in your code that is a little special or different. There's certain criteria that are required to be met, and if you meet those, then it's still going to be the discretion of the people listening to make sure that they feel that you meet those criteria. And that would be something that we'll have to create should there be an interest in doing that.
I think to answer the question though is technically you could draw it around whatever you want.
Sure.
That's what I'm saying. Maybe two neighbors to get together. And you have
Well, that's why we would have
do that.
we would have to create the guideline. Like we would have to say it's an entire platted subdivision. It's an entire platted subdivision with 60%, a vote of 60% of the residents.
If you think about it, it could be a cul-de-sac that's somewhat, isolated from other, like the visual, because a lot of times people don't want to look at boats in people's
I live on one of those. I saw you're going there.
I'm sorry, I'm not mentioning anybody's specific situation, but it could be where somebody lives, they're close to the water, that's a natural for them to have boats. They're not really impacting other neighborhoods. So the criteria would need to be very specific for the Planning and Zoning Board and for City Council to be able to make that decision. So it wouldn't necessarily be as easy as Harborpointe because Harborpointe is so isolated and not really visible to any other neighborhoods. Like you don't drive through it except for the people who live there.
Well, I think that's where us putting verbiage in that said that we allowed this because, like, that needs to be stated that way. Like, this circumstance was allowed because it was a single platted subdivision with special special non-conforming lots already. It's already built on non-conforming lots with non-conforming setbacks because of the way it was platted. It was a special circumstance for that one. Any neighborhoods wanting to do this, any other neighborhoods wanting to take advantage of this would be almost like what was our future land use map, where we made verbiage and said, okay, if you want to play with this, you have to meet these criteria. In order to do this, you would need 60% of the residents, signatures from 60% of the residents, since they don't have an HOA to come forward after having a vote. 60% of the residents, or whatever we say it's going to be, a formal petition with 60% of the residents, and it will only affect the entire platted subdivision within that within that purview, and then they would move forward. To your point, don't we run that consistently? I mean, the difference between east of 19 and west of 19, we have rules and regulations that govern both sides of those things. That there is special to some degree only because of geography. Rules that apply to waterfront homes don't apply to non-waterfront homes, but we have to write code to kind of govern both because we're writing it for one large thing. You could say that everything that we're talking about doing with sidewalks and lighting and street lighting and things around the waterfront overlay district, you could be setting yourself up for somebody who lives on the other side on Washington to come over and go, well, why aren't you putting nice bike paths and all these fancy things on my street? I mean, we're always going to play that game. It comes down to most of what we do is life safety.
If you drive down US 19, 80% of the billboards that you're going to see have attorneys and law firms advertising it. We live in the most litigious state in the union. And guys, if anybody can find a reason to have us run up some big legal bills, it's going to be little Miss Jones or little Mr. Harry who says, gee, you're restrictive us because we're not rich and they are, and I'm just trying to find a way to mitigate any kind of potential so they don't keep adding gasoline to potential tinder here that could light a match, Sure, Harborpointe's great. That's where most of our tax base is for the higher priced homes in this area. So what happens to the little people in the back end? He's going to complain, and you're going to find some lawyer willing to file a class action lawsuit against us that's going to run us a lot of money. I have an attorney right here. Ask her if I'm not telling the truth.
And all of you, I think, have heard me say this. Anyone can sue you for any reason.
So
It doesn't mean it's a valid lawsuit. Doesn't mean you're going to lose. Yes, it's going to cost money to defend it, but that doesn't mean you don't make the policies and take the city in the direction you want to take it.
Correct.
Ultimately, when a decision's made, I'm going to analyze it. I'm going to talk with Tammy. I'm going to talk with Don before it comes back. So right now, if it's something you're interested in, let's talk about it. You definitely can have different criteria for different situations. It doesn't mean there's a valid lawsuit. It's always a lawsuit. There's always a lawyer that will take the case. That part you're correct about.
I agree.
But don't, not have that conversation at this point, at least, for fear of that. Have the conversation and then see what we get to, and then we analyze that.
But we did very well when it came to covering Ryan Burke's property. We went ahead and decided that you had to have at least minimum of 5 acres in order to be able to handle the kind of construction. If we can structure whatever the ordinance is in the same kind of manner to kind of help us set a foundation, I'd rather than just say, well, yeah, we're going to let the HOA do it.
But even then, set yourself
The HOA is
up.
not going to do it.
Yeah.
An overlay is going to allow whomever meets the criteria that's created and approved by council to have some different requirements that the city code enforcement
Correct.
will be doing. The HOA, again, they may do their own thing and have their own responsibilities.
HOA is just an applicant in this particular case.
It's
but
not.
it will
Don't
be city
rely.
regulations.
The overlay will be city. It'll be the city doing it. So your code enforcement will need to know this house on this street is in this overlay, so that boat can stay there. If that's what happens, or no, his house is not on that overlay, and there's a different criteria for that.
So as long as the overlay is large enough that it becomes inclusive of some members that are outside this
Well,
one
not
restricted
Not
group,
necessarily. I think, but you have
then
to
we won't
understand
get in trouble, right?
what Nancy's saying is progress always comes at a cost, right? So we could sit on haunches of what's happened to us prior to people lived here 50 years ago, which is what the city is known to have done. This board and these councils and the last couple of councils we've seen, I've been on this board for 23 years and 22 years, 20 years. And we've seen more accomplished in the last 5 years than the last 15 years prior to that, because we sat here, we talked about everything, and we never did anything because everybody was scared we were going to get sued. Well, this is Florida. They can sue me for crossing the street the wrong way and dropping something, right? It's people can get sued anytime. I think we need to look forward to what is the best progress, right? We've seen things happen with Ryan Burke's property. We've all discussed that property for 25 years. We'd love to see things happen. My question to you, Ms. Tammy, is what are other municipalities near us in a similar situation? What are they doing compared to the code that we have? For instance, let me use Gulf Harbors as an example. That is for the waterfront areas particularly, they're not in an HOA. Well, let me phrase that. They're in a optional HOA. You can opt into HOA, but nobody collects any money. I'm not sure that they even do. There's no rules of engagement there at all. So what do they do as far as their code is concerned for having boats parked in the front?
Well, I can't speak to I haven't done the research on
Sure.
other codes, but I
That's
can
just
tell you
It's just Pasco rules.
the city of Clearwater, because I worked there at some point in my life,
Okay.
Required everything to be behind the front facade.
And what is the timeline for people to have something parked in the front while they load their RV, for instance, or they get their boat ready to take it to the keys? Is there a timeline attached to that?
We can pull some similarly.
I think if we have other things that we can look at and kind of compare to, I think that's a key part of this.
Sure.
Well, and like you discussed, we've talked about relaxing the restriction. We're not talking about where they can park them permanently.
Right.
We're not changing that. So we've talked about relaxing the restriction anyway for the entire city.
Yep.
So that people can all do that.
Mm-hmm.
That's another option here in our possible things is simply to relax the restriction across the board to allow anybody to be able to park in their driveway for 6 days. And then it's blanket. It covers everyone. And then we don't have to worry about it.
Along with that, we get
your concerns, and code enforcement would probably
100%,
appreciate that, because
right.
code enforcement would have a much easier job knowing it's
Correct.
the same for each
I
person.
know we could offer overlays if somebody wanted to have an area wanted to have more restrictive rules.
Yeah, well, I mean, like we
to
could
do just the
we could
opposite.
make it 24 days, and they can restrict it down at the HOA level and go less. They can give them less time.
Correct.
We just can't. We can't. So we're gonna constantly play this game. But even to your point about the possible lawsuits, when we declared that the PUD required 5 acres in order to take advantage of that future land use map, we absolutely could have incurred a lawsuit by someone who could only afford 1 acre. And why can't I build a condo? Oh, that guy's got a lot more money than me. He's a developer, so you're giving him all of these things. We could play that game forever. The easiest version, to Sean's point, the easiest version of being on these boards is to simply always say no.
Right.
Make it as restrictive as possible. Close everything down. We never, ever have to worry about anything whatsoever because, no, you can't do it. We're not letting you.
A question about the
We don't
overlays.
want to live like that.
Are there expenses related to creating an overlay and then
There probably would be a fee, such as like a rezoning fee. I don't know if there's anything established because you address those so infrequently. I can't remember one that you've done where it's been a private.
to address Mr. McDonald's concerns about maybe certain neighborhoods couldn't afford it? Are we talking about $100 or
A rezoning is $500
$500?
essentially.
But it doesn't sound like very many people in the city that we've talked to and all the times that this has come up even really have a problem. Like this application points out a very specific use case for them from the pretense that the city doesn't want to allow this. So they pulled together very specific things that meant this is why this makes sense out here. But it doesn't sound like we're really globally kind of that upset about the idea of relaxing this restriction citywide. If you want to put specific caveats on it, a simple version of it very well might be kind of a hybrid. It could be, we want to relax these things if you fall under, but this would be code enforcement nightmare, by the way. If you fall under the main circumstance that causes this to be an issue in out in Harborpointe is that because they're non-conforming lots, most of them do not have a setback beside the house to allow you to put any of these things beside the house. They're too close to the property lines to even do that. Most of the city, we shifted the properties back in the 70s, the houses were built, shifted to one side of the setbacks. They have 5 foot on one side and 10 on the other.
Right.
Very specifically to allow for you to have room to park a boat in the 10 foot between your property line and that side of the house. Since then, we've shifted the requirements on the building setbacks that it's 15 feet total in most lots, but it's some varying degree, no less than 5 feet on one side. Most people center them and make it 7.5 feet on each side. Well, if you do that, and you've got a fence between you and your neighbor, you're not parking anything beside the house.
Correct.
And so Harborpointe is a perfect example of that. Almost all of them are centered properties. They don't have the room beside them to park them. So if you really wanted to get somewhat restrictive, you could say for homes that do not have a minimum 9 foot setback, which is road width, a minimum 9 feet between their property line and the house, then they can have more leeway to put something in the front. But I don't know that we need to do that. I think it would be up to council to make the call, but I can't imagine much of anybody in the city other than a very random few number of people that would be against the idea of it just being open to 6 consecutive days of prep time in your driveway, and then you have to put it back where it belongs.
If we do it and open it to whoever our residents are, regardless of whether they're in Harborpointe or back in the back area, as long as the vehicle has a up-to-date Florida state tag and license on it, then why can't we allow it to be there for 8 days or 7 days and give them the opportunity? You're going to have a lot of smaller homes. They don't have a garage even. So therefore, if you're going to work on your boat, you're going to have to do it in your front yard, and you're going to have to do it right in your front driveway. And I just didn't want us to look like we only pandered to those who can afford. I've got a 10-car garage, guys. I'm not worried about it, but not everybody, a lot of the houses in my neighborhood, there are no garages at all. And if I had to work on my boat and wanted to get it ready for, or my RV or my trailer, and you're telling me, geez, because you can't afford a bigger lot, and before you can't afford to go into one of our communities, we're not allowing you to do that. I think one rule for all seems a hell of a lot more fair to me.
And I was the biggest person that opposed it last time when it was brought forth last time, just from a perspective of what I do for a living. So I've driven down entire neighborhoods where I've gone to go see a house that was on the Gulf of Mexico, right? Excuse me, Gulf of the United States or America, what it is now. And I've driven to a $4 million house, and I've passed 3 other places that were, there was boats parked in the yard that looked like they came there and died in 1975. And I'm trying to take a client who's driving his Rolls Royce to go look at this place, and he goes, I don't want to see that on my way in.
No.
I don't want us to have a similar problem. We had that problem. There were streets. Blue Point was the worst offender for the longest time. We had entire streets in the city 3 councils ago that you could go drive down the street, and the first thing they would say is he would walk out and tag them for code enforcement. They would come run out and say, no, we're grandfathered in. Well, that boat's been grandfathered in since 1975. It has never moved. Well, I don't care. I'm still grandfathered in. I don't want to see that happen again, because then it does devalue what we've done. And then we have the same problem with taxes, especially if DeSantis gets to do what he wants to do. So, and that's a real concern. I don't want us to step back. So I'm okay as long as it's restrictive across, and I agree, across the board is probably safer for her and for Pat for code enforcement. But I think we need to be very concise about what it is and make sure the rules in place so that when code enforcement does go out, they don't have to. Well, I moved yesterday and I brought it back today, but like their application says, I think it's a maximum number of days, correct?
Up to 6 consecutive days, 12 days total a month.
So that right there helps alleviate that problem.
Yeah, and everybody feels,
and that's my biggest concern,
that they're on the same level.
Correct.
I agree.
And I'm okay with that.
I would be fine with that.
So would you like us to bring back to you some some language? We can look at what we can do a little matrix of what other cities are doing in terms of duration.
Personally.
But look at it more of a global, citywide regulation as opposed to an overlay.
I would like to see that.
And I don't want to, and honestly, my other concern is creating a precedence. That just because you want to do something different in the city, in your neighborhood, that we don't allow in the city, that automatically you think you're going to go file for an overlay, and it's going to come back up here, and it's going to take people's time and resources for the city to look at this, just because we want to be able to paint our houses this color, and our association won't allow it, right? So we want an overlay. I think it's better to look at it from a global changing for the entire city.
Yeah.
Because we do have to adjust, right? We had to adjust when it came to signs. We didn't allow digital signs. Yes, Mr. Chris.
I think that Mike's got a great idea. With your leadership, I think that is awesome to put it out citywide. And 6 days. Listen, this is a boating community. People come here. They don't come here for any other reason. They like the water. They like the waterfront. They like to go out on the water with their kids. They like to fish, all those things. And I think we got to create an environment that fosters that. And I think doing it citywide is a great idea, but we're going to have to be restrictive on it. It's going to have to be 6 days or 7 days, and that's it. And, and then we have to crack down if they go further than that.
The other side of that too, because we are actually the only Airbnb friendly community in Pasco County, because Pasco County has rules against short-term rental. But that's a big boon to our property values, because there is a lot of investment that's looking for Airbnbs. That's a lot of money right now. And if you've got somebody coming into the neighborhood for 6 days or 5-day rental around scallop season, they're going to bring a boat on a trailer and it's going to be in the driveway.
Yep.
So they can go use the ramp and put it in and go do their thing. Or at least the trailer, they're going to go drop the boat in, tie it up to the floating dock at the back of that Airbnb, and the trailer's going to be in the driveway. And I don't think we want to. That is the kind of money that's coming into the community that's going to drive those restaurants down on the waterfront. That's the stuff that we do want if we want progress in the city. We're going to need that. We need that revenue. I just definitely agree with our earlier point of figuring out how to make sure that that's taken care of properly. But I think this ordinance would shift to allowing that in a more consecutive way. Most of the time, people aren't staying more than 6 or 7 days.
And I've actually had rentals. My one rental over there by Waterfront Park, they came for scallop season, and they brought their boat. The first thing he said to me is, "Where can I park my trailer?" And I said, "Make sure it's behind the front of the house, in the driveway, because of the code." So we were covered, and they stayed for 2 weeks, and they paid handsomely to stay there, and they paid to park their boat. As a matter of fact, at the time, it was Guild Dogs were there. So
But they're eating at
Yeah.
all of
100%.
those people that are coming in for short-term rentals are typically not cooking, especially not on a day on the water.
No.
They're rolling in and they're hitting Hooters.
Yeah.
Or they're going to Whiskey Joe's.
Yeah.
Or they're going to Catches and they're eating on the way in. I mean, I know I don't go home and cook after a day of boating. I don't want to.
Maybe I'm gonna have scallops.
That's off the side of the boat.
And you're not catching
That's not what I
anything.
do.
Yeah. The next day, scallops is
Okay,
next day.
that's the next day. Okay.
It's next day.
All right.
Somebody else
Better
clean the
be
dishes
standard.
tonight.
Is that good for number 2?
Yes,
Are we good, guys?
good.
Number 3.
Oh, number 3.
Is that you as well?
I-
Or is that Tam?
Item
Is
number
that-
3.
Item
okay.
number 3.
Yes,
Item
the
number
PUD discussion.
Yeah, PUD.
Sorry, I didn't
Yeah.
have the agenda in front of me.
I'm jumping ahead of you, Tam. Exactly.
That's a big one.
Here we go. Okay, so this next topic is a discussion on the draft planned unit development district regulations that exist within the city code. Next slide, please. You want to make it a large scale so it's visible? Oh, you don't have to. I just thought maybe it would make it larger. Okay, so the purpose of this discussion is to look at section 127-58, which is planned unit development district within the city's zoning code. And this is primarily to address a density inconsistency between the comprehensive plan and the PUD standards, and then to obtain direction from the board before we prepare a formal zoning text amendment to address at least that one minor change. The next slide is about. Next slide, please. Oh, does it not go automatically?
Got it, Tam. It's okay.
So about PUD districts generally, they are for project-specific regulations. So it establishes permitted uses through a PUD rezoning. So it establishes all of its own regulations within itself. They're project-specific standards, so developing standards that are tailored to the unique characteristics of a site and the development that's being proposed. They feature integrated development, so the uses, the site design, the circulation, all those components are reviewed as a whole, as a coordinated development plan, which is called a PUD concept plan. And there's flexibility in design. So in some cases where you're what we call Euclidean zoning districts, may not allow for a certain front yard setback or certain configuration of uses, a PUD allows you to bring forward innovative alternative site layouts and development patterns that might be approved when they offer public benefits. Next slide, please. So the approach to the revisions were to, of course, to address that comp plan density and consistency. The revisions preserve flexibility and the customized nature of a planned unit development zoning. They clarify the existing provisions on the books today, improve organization, readability, and administration, and they, above all, they avoid any added burden on development. We want to steer clear of any Senate Bill 180 implications. So essentially, the standards that you see are kind of a repackaged just to be a little bit more readable, more implementable over time. But there are a few things, and I'll point those out, that we're doing that are also not burdensome on development. So the next slide is the maximum density standard. So the Cody River Landing future land use category was adopted in, I believe, 2024, and it allows up to 40 dwelling units per acre, and it requires the development within that land use category to proceed through a planned unit development zoning. So the PUD district limits residential density to 18 dwelling units per acre. So you can see where it's not high enough to really be able to implement that Cody River Landing future land use category. Next slide, please. The next thing that is for your consideration, it was brought up a second ago regarding the 5-acre minimum. Today, the planned unit development district requires 5 acres in order to be eligible for a planned unit development. So this draft retains that 5-acre minimum, but as an option for your consideration is that it allows consideration of smaller sites when the city council recognizes that as when it's approved by the city council as part of a PUD rezoning. So in that case, it would be a more flexible alternative for smaller infill and redevelopment opportunities. It would reduce barriers to the use of the PUD for those qualifying infill and redevelopment projects. And it always allows the city council to evaluate whether a smaller site can actually achieve the PUD district objectives. Next slide, please. Just as an example, next slide, please.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, my bad.
So the next example is it's a 0.93 acre redevelopment site in downtown Safety Harbor. And you can see on the front, there's a 3-story building, which has retail on the bottom and offices up on top. And then in the back, down the street, which is also part of this same 0.93 acre development, are 3 stories of luxury apartments. So those are 28, I think, 28 residential homes in the back. So it's just a kind of an illustration of what you can do on 1 acre, essentially. Now, this isn't a downtown. Parking's a little bit more of a unique situation because you do have some on-street parking. The developer actually provided the angle parking in the back, and then you can see I think if you go to the next slide, Sal, you can see those 2 buildings there, and the parking is actually interior of the lot, aside from that street parking. Just a representation. And the next slide. There's also a question regarding the special exception use prohibition. There is something that's in your current PUD standards today that says that special exception uses are not permitted in a planned unit development district, and the draft revision is proposing to delete that. And the reason is that permitted uses are established when you approve the planned unit development, rezoning, and the concept plan. So the use approval is already addressed within the development of those regulations. And special exceptions, by their nature, are tied to a specific, I'll call it a Euclidean or a standard zoning district. So upon your PUD rezoning, those underlying zoning districts are replaced. They're no longer referred to anymore. So the special exception use doesn't feel like it's doing anything in this particular case, except for being a little bit confusing to me anyway. So something for you to think about as we press on. So our discussion topics, next please. Should the maximum density be tied to the applicable future land use category, or should it be stated specifically within the planned unit development district? Today it says the maximum is 18 units per acre, and that's because all of your land use categories in the city were up to 18 units per acre. It doesn't need to be restated, but it was felt at the time, I guess it was worthwhile to put that in there. Now you have some land use categories that are 18 and one land use category that allows up to 40. So a clean way to do that would say refer to your underlying future land use category for the maximum density. So that's something to, otherwise we're going to have to say maximum density is 40. I guess you could do that too. So is the deletion of the special exception prohibition appropriate, given that permitted uses are established by the PUD rezoning? So individual PUDs have their own list of uses that apply. The next consideration is, should flexibility be provided for qualifying infill and redevelopment projects below the 5-acre minimum site area requirement? The next topic is, do the provisions addressing the existing PUDs and future modifications provide sufficient clarity and continuity? So those were for PUDs that are already on the books and what applies to them going forward. And then also, how do you modify a PUD? So if you have a PUD on the books and somebody says, I would like to have different types of uses, if it meets the criteria for being substantial, it would need to come back to the Planning and Zoning Board and also the City Council to have that modification. And that's on the books today. It's the same that's always been there. And then lastly, do the revisions improve the readability, clarity, and ease of administration of the PUD district? So next is the recommendation, and that's for the board to provide staff with comments regarding the draft revisions, identify any desired changes or refinements, to provide policy direction on those key issues that I mentioned, and then direct staff to prepare a zoning text amendment for formal public hearing consideration. And I will add that we do have a PUD application that was received, I think late the week before last. So that PUD, which is in the Cody River Landing future land use category, would need to have this adjustment done to allow it to move forward. We would bring this back to, go to the next slide, please, Sal. We would bring that back to the Planning and Zoning Board by next month, if that's possible. I think it is. We would incorporate your direction, package it all up, and bring it back, and then start those public hearing processes. And that's all that I have. So, ready to answer your questions.
So are we looking at this because of the application as well?
The application is coming in order for it to be, we can't allow anything above 18 units per acre, and I believe they're coming in at around 23 units per acre, if I'm not mistaken. So they would not be consistent with your planned unit development. We wouldn't be able to apply PUD, but they're required to have PUD because of the future land use category. So there might be inconsistency.
Right.
We must update at least the density. So that's up to you too. If you want to just update the density and leave the rest of the revisions on the table, that's something that you could also consider.
And what did we do at the waterfront district? It was 18 and we raised it to 40. So
Right.
what prevents us from doing that again?
So right now it has a future land use category that allows up to 40, but now we're addressing the zoning because the future land use category requires that it be a PUD rezoning. So in order for them to be able to achieve what they want to do, which is 23 units per acre, thereabouts, they would need to have that 18 units per acre that's on the books today increased to 40.
So more or less.
And that's harder to do than what you're proposing here?
So what I did was to go through we've been looking at this for a few months, so I've gone through it and looked at your code to see if there was anything that could be updated to be modernized, to be better organized, to be more readily interpreted when you guys are doing your work, when staff's doing its work. So what I'm saying is, at minimum, we need to have the density increased. The other strike through and underline, we can leave those on the table if you'd like. If there's like bits and pieces that you like versus don't like, what I'm saying is you can slice and dice this how you like, except the density. We must proceed with the increase of the PUD maximum density.
So circling back, go ahead.
I was going to say, if I could propose maybe putting back the discussion points and maybe just take them one at a time, and that might be easier than.
So circling back around to when we dealt with Cody River Landing, there was discussion. The question was brought to, I believe, your office regarding what do the other communities, waterfront communities in particular, allow for maximum density. And at the time, I think we had discussed that I think Tarpon Springs was the most, and I think it was 35 or 40 units per acre. But everybody else was sitting between 25 and 30. And so we were actually very restrictive in the city comparatively at 18.
That's correct.
So if we adjusted ours for future development, because I know of several parcels that people are going to try to build on.
The thing is that you have adopted a future land use category that allows up to 40 units per acre and the properties must have a planned unit development zoning. So we must have a zoning that's consistent with that category.
Yeah.
So there's no discussion about the interim unless you're ready to change the comp plan and reduce that down to something that if you're thinking between 18 and 40. But we've already established that 40 units per acre is Cody River Landing, future land use.
Cody River Landing, but that's not the rest of the city.
Right. But
So if this development's, for instance, over off of Ebbtide, right, which I know there's a large parcel over there.
This is only in the Cody River Landing future land use category. Those are the only ones that would be able to tap into that 40 units per acre.
Right.
If you put 40 units per acre in the zoning code, it could give the impression if I get a PUD, I can go to 40.
Correct.
But if you do it the way that I've stated it in the revisions, it says refer to your land use category for what your maximum density is. And that's what I would recommend.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, it sounds like we're just making it match.
Yes.
It should have been done simultaneously.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm reading through all the red and then listening. I mean, this is just us catching up with the zoning map to match that, because we do have the caveat that yes, we're changing PUD standards, but only within the future land use map.
And where's the linkage to our utilities to be able to know what we can handle on this? I mean, we've already got a water system that's taxed because it's not upgraded, and now you're saying, well, yeah, we can add 40 units here, we can have so many units an acre here, but where's the correlation for us to get with the utilities department and say, hey, we don't really have the water to supply that?
We do that during the PUD.
100%.
So the whole reason to have a PUD standard is that the people can come in and they can go, okay, I can build up to X, but in order to activate that, I now have to go through the PUD process where that's when we get to go in and go, that's fine. We're willing to allow you to build to X density, but this is what it's going to do to our utilities. This is what we're requiring you to put into our utilities in order to get approval for this. So same thing when they built the parcel between Avila Bay that caught on fire, the parcel between Avila Bay and Pelican, when that guy came in and wanted to develop that, part of the discussion between the building department and that developer was, that's fine. We'd love to see you develop that and turn that into something, but you're going to continue Ritchie, which it's drawn as though it goes through there. You're going to put that road in, and you're going to put all the appropriate drainage in to drain that corner back out across to where the water is. Here's all the things the city wants for you to be allowed to do that development in that space. And that's what that's what the entire state should be doing that. That's the problem we have, is that we have development going on in places that no one's paying attention to how it's going to affect watershed and everything else outside of that neighborhood. And now you're seeing the state start to step in and go, oh, we need to think about this on a broader scale. And that's what we did when we did the future land use. That was why she put so much time into it, was to make sure that we were covering every possible place that someone could try to sneak something in without having to go through sitting down and going with the city and talking about, how's it, okay, great, you're going to put this thing in, you're going to bring all these residents in, guess what? You're upsizing the mains from the wells.
One of the issues we have, though, is a good percentage of our utilities, our city utilities, are servicing other areas that we have absolutely no control over.
Right.
What somebody's going to develop is going to put a higher tax on our property,
right,
where we really have trouble servicing our own community, because guess what? I mean, we've got water all the way up into Hudson right now that we're having to supply. So anybody who wants to go into Pasco County and say, hey, I want to put another 600 units up here, I'm over here helping redevelop River Ridge Country Club. That's 184 acres. We have 8,000 new homes going in over there. But the county's controlling all of it, even though some of it would normally be classified as Newport Ritchie. And they've got no say at all in how all this is going to be handled. We're in that same position. Right now, you've got so much potential development outside with our own city limits that has to be serviced by our water company and our wells.
Well, and that's why we're working, like this specifically that's one why we made this part of the overlay. But that's what the other part that we brought in was talking about it. That's the annexation portion, right? Is that we're trying to annex in those properties, trying to bring those properties under our code enforcement, all the things that we currently service with utility. I mean, that's, I think, one of the next points. But yeah.
Every building permit has, if it's issued in the county or if it's issued in the city, somebody needs to look to see if there's available capacity. The state of Florida requires that there be water available for that on day one. So you can't get a certificate of occupancy if there's not water. For larger projects, we do a development like a build out and we do the multiplication and we see, is there capacity there? And that's a routine across from site plan all the way to a building permit to determine, is there water? Who's providing the water? If the county's doing their permitting, they will get, and the city is the provider of the water, they will coordinate with the city to say, is there water there? So, especially if it's a bigger development.
Yeah, I don't see any reason why we wouldn't.
No, it just needs to happen.
Yeah, this just needs to be added to address that so that it matches that, all that time we already did.
So we'll go ahead and refer to the underlying future land use category for the maximum density allowable in the PUD. Okay. The next one, do you think it makes sense to do away with the special exception prohibition because the set of uses that are allowed in a PUD are established as part of the rezoning? So they're essentially making their own list of categories.
I don't think it needs to be redundant.
And you'll have time.
There is redundancy in that, obviously.
The next one, what do we think about keeping the 5-acre minimum site requirement with the ability of city council to be able to lower that for
Agreed, 100%.
qualifying projects?
I think that was, for the entire group, that was the consensus across the board.
And then the other ones are more generic. So do the provisions addressing existing PUDs? I know that the standard within the code today refers to an ordinance that was adopted maybe in, I don't know when it was, but we'd have to look at that. I don't think there's any burden that would be placed on an older PUD having to comply with this because it's really not changing any of the standards. If anything, it's just giving it a higher density and just clarifying some things. So I don't think there's any implications for what was approved in the past and what would be on the books today. So, but we can delve into that more deeply if we need to.
Tamara, you talking about from the acreage reduction?
No, like for instance, was there some filing requirement, application requirement that we changed? So if somebody comes forward and they want to modify their PUD, do they have to do some higher level of analyses or whatever? But nothing's being proposed in here that would be an additional burden because we're trying to keep under that Senate Bill 180 thing. This is essentially just saying that we're reconfiguring, reorganizing, but everything that is of consequence is the same. There's no added requirements. We're of course increasing the density,
right?
But that's not a burden.
Well, for that area down there, just so you all know, if you monkey with that acreage in the waterfront overlay district, you can have 40 units per acre under a PUD. So if you lower the acreage for the PUD, say 1 acre, you could have a 1 acre parcel that could have 40 units of density in it. So, and that was the reason that construct was put in originally is to protect and not have things that are overly dense. You need to have 5 acres in order to get some kind of density because the public's not going to get a lot of a private acre property if you put a 40 unit development per acre down there. So think about that as you look at that.
Let me see what that safety harbor.
That's what I said.
I think Seaside right now has in their real estate thing what they shouldn't. They're saying that you can access this acreage and they cannot for that property.
But for instance, what happens if somebody has 4.99 acres?
They couldn't get it right.
They just couldn't get it because they have to have.
The idea is a simple enough property to get 5 acres, and then you can put
Well, that's
a PUD in.
That's the concern. The problem is the infill, right? That's why it is what if you've got something being developed this direction and something being developed that direction, and the piece of property between them is only 3 acres. Yeah, now you've got something nice and big being built this direction and something nice and big being built this direction, and this can't access it. This can't be part of that same flow and same setup because it's a parcel that doesn't meet this requirement. But it would require the city to actually go through and verify why that needs to be done, not just.
And also keep in mind, parking is a big constraint on a site, a 1 acre site. You can only go as high as your parking will allow you. So it's really constrained by that, unless there's a shared parking garage or something like that. Well, we can, I understand what you're saying. So we could provide more detail when we get into it, if that's a direction that you want to go in. We're just throwing that
You
out.
have an existing, for example, trailer park. We've got a couple of those that we've looked at as far as redeveloping for more tiny homes. They're already grandfathered in. Their density levels are already established. They each have individual water meters. They each have their own individual electric meters. They're all set, but they're not the 40-foot wide minimum width of the lots, obviously, that we already have. Those are grandfathered for trailers, but we're trying to get rid of mobile homes and put in more stable structures.
Mm-hmm.
Would that go ahead and just still be allowed at the same density it exists today if you were going to redevelop it, or does that have to come in as a brand new PUD to be reconsidered with a whole different ratio of units per acre?
If they were going to come through for a PUD, they would have their underlying future land use category would be 18 units per acre, no change, because they're not in the Cody River Landing district. Cody River Landing is a category that's available only within Cody River Landing, and it's only applied to those properties that have asked for a future land use plan amendment. So we only have a few properties right now that are coming in for their PUD rezoning that have a future land use category that's Cody River Landing. Those are the only ones that can tap into the 40 units per acre. Everything else in the city is going to be the same. It's up to 18 units per acre. If there's a mobile home park, I'm not quite sure what the non-conforming use requirement or non-conforming lots requirement would be. I need to look at that specifically. But if they wanted to come in for a PUD, they would be limited to whatever their future land use category is in terms of residential, and that would be 18 units per 18 units per acre. Also, whenever we say maximums, those are maximums. Everything else ratchets away at that. How much parking you need? What are your buffers? What are the environmental? So it's just a total cap, and everything else needs to play together to actually work out what can be accomplished on a development site.
Let the record show Mike Perez has to step out now at 2:37.
Yeah, sorry. I've got a construction issue going on that unfortunately needs me.
Thank you.
Apologies. Sorry.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Sorry about that, guys.
Okay.
One other comment, if I could, on the PUD that's been submitted to the city, is that PUD just a portion of 8.5 acres at the first phase? Because I understand that PUD is for the entire 8.5 acres. And the reason I ask that is because if they're at 23 per acre, it's only on that one small area. If you spread that across 8.5 acres, you're going to be under the 18. So do we have a timing issue on their being able to move forward with that change or not?
So I only know that the number I heard was 23 units per acre or 22.
Yeah, and that's on the 5 acre parcel, 4 point something acre parcel.
I don't know for certain because we just found, before they were showing us the residential, and then the rest of it came in recently. So I haven't crunched the numbers yet to see what it is, but it could be.
So that's my question basically. In general, let's say that they actually have 8.5 within that PUD construct, and they're only developing that first phase, and they're 23 in that first phase, but they're actually, if you spread across 8.5 acres, they're 16 or whatever it is.
Well, they have some residential on the other parts too.
Are they showing that though? And then, okay, I haven't seen it myself, so
I know, I need to like crunch through that, so, but even if that's the case, and they come in at less than 40, somebody else could come in at 40. Right now, we have a
we can fix it for sure.
we
I
have a
just
plan that says 40, but we have nothing that we can implement it with in terms of zoning.
no, that needs fixed for sure. I just
Yeah.
from a timing perspective, because I know they're pushing forward other things. I just want to make sure that we aren't.
Yeah, we're gonna beat them to the, yeah. That was the intent, that's why we're doing this now, so we can beat them to the finish line.
Okay.
Do you need anything else for the PUD? Any more questions?
Oh, yes.
There was one more point, I think, right?
Okay, so we're gonna take away the special exception. We're going to do a little bit more research on that 5 acre and see what the full implications of that are. And then I'll also spend some more time thinking through if a dated PUD came forward with like a modification, what that would mean. I don't think there's any change in that though. And that's it.
Okay.
Yes.
How would we were thinking about changing the 5 acres where they could ask the council to make an exception to the 5 acres. Okay,
Yeah,
but does that have to go through the planning and zoning board first?
I would say yes. It would have to
Okay.
go through planning and zoning.
Absolutely, 100%.
Okay.
Yep. And it could be something as minor as and the reason I started thinking about it, because that little parcel that's south of Treadway is not included in this overall scheme. So concept plan. And I was like, well, this is going to be out there by itself. It's got future land use category, but it's unusable.
Oh, talking about the one right next to the pirate bar,
Yes.
that little parcel. Yeah, they didn't include that.
I don't think that's in there.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, well, more to be provided later. So thank you. And we'll go on to our next one, which is the Voluntary Annexation Policy and Procedures Manual. Let me get my slides up. Okay. Let's go to the next slide, Sal. Thank you. So the purpose of this discussion item is to introduce the draft annexation policy and procedures framework and the phased annexation approach to discuss that, to discuss everything, of course, but discuss the phased annexation approach in particular and obtain your direction for any modifications to the documents for city council consideration and actually for the planning and zoning board consideration going forward, because you would they, Don, would they? P&Z, yes, they would, because you guys are the official annexation board. Is that correct? The charter?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, switch your hats now.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so the next slide, please. So why annexation? So to expand and strengthen your municipal tax base, to be able to align your city boundaries with your municipal service areas, because not all cases are your municipal service areas within the city, to support redevelopment and economic development objectives, to improve long-term fiscal sustainability, eliminate any irregular boundaries and unincorporated enclaves where appropriate, and to establish a proactive annexation strategy that rather than just a case-by-case approach. Next slide, please. So what does the manual do? Next slide. Part 1 is the draft policy framework. It has annexation goals and priorities that the city would direct their actions. It would target specific geographies and phasing within the annexation area. It would have fiscal and service delivery expectations, and then it would have decision-making criteria for city council. Part 2, next slide, it includes the administrative procedures. So what staff would use, staff and legal, to determine eligibility under Chapter 171 Florida statutes, and also within the city code, to look at fiscal and service analysis, to look at land use and zoning coordination, and then also what the public hearing and implementation procedures, because those are specific to annexations per Chapter 171 Florida. board statute. Next slide. So the key principles of this manual would be to focus on voluntary annexation. So that would be an agreement with a property owner and the city to include those properties within the municipal boundaries of the city of Port Richey. To require a fiscal and service feasibility review, so to understand what would be needed to be able to serve those, to fully serve those parcels, and making sure that the property owner is aware of all of the costs associated with coming into the city. To coordinate annexation and future land use and zoning, those properties that come into the city would be coming in with county and also county future land use and zoning. So as they came into the city, we'd need to do amendments to get them on the city program. To ensure that annexations provide long-term benefit. Not all properties are the same. Some are have more needs than others. But it is important that with the statutes that you cannot, you have to annex reasonably compact areas, so you can't necessarily jump your way around to get to like the more lucrative or I guess the better properties. They call it cherry picking, so it needs to be more of a compact arrangement. You need to avoid creating service inefficiency, so you need to make sure it makes sense from a water and sewer and streets and all the different types of services that the city provides. And then promoting those logical, compact municipal boundaries. So it's always like a question. I know in Port Richey and Newport Richey in general, you've got these giant unincorporated areas that are called Port Richey, but there's a city of, and I don't know if that annexation is going to resolve that issue, but it can resolve for some people as to understanding, are we in the city, are we not in the city, by kind of rounding off those boundaries. So the next slide is the proposed annexation strategy. We're looking at a phased implementation approach that includes a phase 1 and then future phases. The phase 1 would include industrial parcels, commercial parcels, strategic enclave areas, and any properties that are utility adjacent that are also contiguous with the city limits. For future phases, the city's thinking of looking at US 19 corridor opportunities, additional enclaves and boundary kind of rounding off processes, and then looking at residential and mixed use areas that may require more detailed analysis and consideration. So the next slide is the phase 1 annexation areas, and the advantages of this compact area that's generally east of Congress Street and my glasses and south of Ridge Road. I was thrown by the east-west. I don't know why I have a problem with that. The implementation advantages, fewer compatibility concerns, proximity to municipal services and infrastructure, a positive fiscal return, and you did have a spreadsheet, I believe, within your packet that you could see some of the financials associated with that. It supports redevelopment and economic development goals of the city, improves the municipal boundary continuity, eliminating, the phase 1 would also include these enclave areas throughout the city. I believe there are 200 parcels that are included in a spreadsheet within your packet. And then it would be a manageable implementation effort. So kind of like as the city starts to just get going on these, it's like we can kind of see how it goes without like biting off more than you could possibly chew at some time. So this is kind of a strategy to get us going. The next slide is parcel evaluation factors. So for each parcel, we would look at its eligibility under Chapter 171 relative to compactness and contiguousness with the city. What's the second one there? Looking at service delivery implications, utility considerations, fiscal implications, redevelopment potential, whether there's interest by the property owner, very important, and then looking at the long-term public benefit. So the next slide is for the Planning and Zoning Board discussion. Does the draft framework establish a clear and workable annexation process? Are the proposed annexation priorities appropriate? Should industrial, commercial, and the enclave areas remain the initial focus? Are the fiscal and service review requirements appropriate? And are additional annexation areas or criteria recommended? And the next slide is what our recommendation is that the Planning and Zoning Board review and discuss the draft policies and procedures, look at the phased annexation approach, provide any comments or direction that you can offer, and then we would package the revisions up, bring it back to you at a, that's a public hearing as well for the adoption?
Yeah.
Public hearing with Planning and Zoning Board, and of course, public hearing with City Council. And that's what I have. And then, of course, the city manager is very, very involved in this, and so I'm sure he can answer any of the tough questions that I can.
Yeah, just to give some thought as we go through this. Kind of thought of this as a strategy as we move forward for annexation. Because one, it's important for Port Richey to grow for many reasons. I won't name them all, but what I looked at is that I've worked with the team here to kind of look at what would be an annexation strategy that would be feasible, acceptable, and realistic. You know, as we start this process, kind of outline a couple of areas that introduce themselves as being amenable to being annexed, which was the industrial district. Now, there's been a gap in communication since then due to elections and other things, so just waiting to finalize that. But partners that want to participate in this, and then looking at enclaves that actually touch the city and making them part of that process, which will allow us in our strategy as we develop this thing is be able to build this thing and be able to, because there's going to be some what we refer to as you're going to be learning as you go on the model with a lot of this process here. But we figured this would be the simplest and the easiest way to go through this process. And then I look at it also as a campaign plan too, to promote annexation as we move forward. So as we take, let's say, the industrial district, maybe there's that main road that runs through there that we can do some improvements on. Be able to get there, do some improvements, so when people see that we're annexing, they're actually getting value by being a member of the community and the city. So that's just kind of, just in a nutshell, kind of how I kind of looked at it. And then as we annex those portions and that 203 properties that enclave onto us, then start looking at the 19 corridor and the benefits that, that support the city as we move forward there. Not only the fact that we provide services, but also there's opportunity to bring, those unincorporated areas into, Port Richey. And as of right now, we do provide services. There's not really a demand on it, but it's that we do it in a phased process, as mentioned by Tammy here. I think it's something that's suitable and feasible. And it goes back to also there's going to have to be services provided. And as we work that process so that, as the city grows, the services grow with it. But if we grow appropriately within the annexation strategy, we will never outrun our service requirements. So as we build it, it supports to serve, and then we just continue to develop the process. And my vision as I sat and thought about it would be, kind of everything kind of north of Massachusetts, east a little, and then north of 52, and then to the west coast. And then looking at what we could gather in that area. I know it's a lot. It's ambitious because I believe it's $9 billion in taxable revenue is what it came out to be. So I'm not sure what the turnaround what that would have been in tax ad valorem back to the city as far as funding. But it's also a large piece of annexation that would require, at some point you'd probably outgrow Newport Richey at that point.
So this discussion's been had multiple times. As long as I've sat here, we've had this conversation because one of the responsibilities of a successful P&Z board is to go out and find citizens that want to annex in the city, right? We've never done that. Even though it's been brought to our attention multiple times, we've had the conversation. The last time we had this conversation, which I believe was last year, we had this conversation, I brought a very real scenario that had happened locally. There's a parcel across the street from us, literally across the street from us. that I sold that parcel to a client of mine, and it was a industrial/commercial parcel, and he wanted to annex into the city. So I brought him in, had the conversation, and the first thing the city says, "Great, we're going to hand you a check. Hand you a bill for $10,000." And he was like, "What are you talking about? Bill for $10,000?" He said, "You have to connect to our services," and he had just put a brand new septic on this property, and as such, to be able to annex in the city, he had to connect to sewer, and there was no conversation even had at that point. He was like, "Great, have a nice day. I'm not going to give you any more tax money and write you a check for $10,000 when I just spent $9,000 putting a new septic in." And there was nobody that could answer the question for me or the client.
Right.
And so I brought that to everybody's attention last year. I said, we need to find a way to kind of work with those citizens, right? So is there a way that we can slowly phase them in, or we can find out as their existing systems, for instance, are failing, then we tie them into our programs, because we're going to find that, especially as we head south towards Massachusetts, because I agree, that entire corridor should belong to us. We should be there, right? All the way from 19, from basically, if you drew a straight line from Congress all the way to 52, that should be sitting here too, right after 19. But I think we're going to find that that's going to be a real hurdle for us if we don't figure out a way to work through that. And I don't think we got any further with that, did we, Eric? Yeah.
I think this is the first, the reality of it is this is the first time that you've actually had somebody apply a strategy and put together
100%.
something. So with this, we've actually got a policy and a strategy and procedures in place that we can work with, and that we can work with, the P&Z board in order to adjust, because like you said, this is going to be a phased process, and there's things that have to be done in order to phase the process in, or there will be no growth.
Correct.
Because we will basically tie our hands in the entire process of moving forward. But at some point, as we do this, at least build in our policies that after a certain period of time, you have to convert over, or we work a way for that process to occur. But I kind of take from a big picture down looking, and then from there, like you said, there's those other small items that are going to be those I gotchas as we try to do the annexation piece of getting those properties to commit. Because I've had residents come and say, "I want to annex," and we look at them, we're like, "No, you're really not in Port Richey. You're like 3 streets down and 2 over, but we'd love to bring you in, but we can't." But being able to have a process where we can, but then where you say like they have septic tanks. There's a lot of septic tanks in this area. I've come to realize that with just a lot of the community members that I've dealt with. We've got to have something that allows us to, to network them in, and then eventually, whether it be new construction occurs, road development, let's say we're working stormwater management development, maybe in those processes we're able to provide those services that at least have a linkage to. But those are some of the larger strategy things we look at as we do grow this, and that's going to be that process. But what we wanted to do is provide you a strategy, at least realistic goals, and then a phased process to at least show you, hey, this is something moving forward that you can physically touch, physically move, and physically adjust, so that we can go from being Port Richey to being Port Richey.
Correct. Agree 100%.
Well, Colonel, one of the things that Matt mentioned to us when he was doing this is that when we provided water to these outlying areas, those developers had agreed in writing to become part of the city of Port Richey. Now, whether it's in a contiguous manner or not, they'd already made that agreement. Now, I know that was a long time ago, but that sets a predicate for us to say, hey, you had an agreement, you're supposed to come in. Can we not go ahead and find a way to enforce that and bring them in without this, let's go through all this voluntary annexation?
Once they
That
become contiguous,
beg your pardon?
once they become contiguous to the city limits, you can process the annexation because they have an agreement that's already in place. But if they're not contiguous and you don't have a special annexation area outlined with the county, that could allow you to.
How can we find out which agreements were still in place at that time?
I would have to go to city staff and ask them because I was not part of
And
that. I don't
we
know
have to look at that because I know nothing of any agreements that have been made that are physically on hand. I'd have to go to Sal for that, for any historical agreements. But I honestly believe this is something that we're going to have to start over.
You talk about when they took on our utilities, part of that taking on our utilities was that they agreed to annex. Remember we talked about that, Nancy?
Yeah.
And you
Annexation
were
agreement.
questioning the legality of being able to do that
Well,
so
that's
far
what
back.
Matt had brought forward, and Matt met with the county manager, who already said, hey, we'll be glad to get rid of all the enclave properties, just take them over.
Yeah.
So that should eliminate a lot of that friction. But
You still have
Matt
to do the
told us
process to
all
take
here
it.
that
You
he
still have to do this process. Like you don't need the written policy, but you still have to go through the ordinance and do those things to if that
we need to
property is
find out for
contiguous.
sure who made those
Yeah.
agreements.
We can't be
Yeah.
creating
I mean,
spots
they made agreements with a bunch of people that did hook up, but if this gentleman's hooked up and this one's not, and he's contiguous to us, we can't get him till we get him.
If you do have an agreement though,
Yeah.
to hang your hat on, once it becomes contiguous, you can do this process. You don't have to worry about getting approval from the property owner because they've already approved. They said, we're coming into your city once we become contiguous.
How long is that
Does
valid
their
for?
agreement,
Or Tammy?
It depends on what the agreement
It depends
says.
on what it
I think it would
says.
be-
does their agreement say it has to be contiguous?
No, that's
That's
our,
state
that's
statute.
that's a state.
That's state law.
State says
Jesus,
that.
you had to have
Yeah.
that first, sure.
We have
Now,
to see the agreements and see
I have
what
a
they say.
question along with what he's talking about with the water. Right now, when we're providing water outside of the city, is there like a long-term contract attached with that? That we are under contract to provide water
I
for
think once
20
you
years?
provide
Or
water, you're on the hook for providing water. I don't think you can
it's
take
a
it out.
perennial contract that we're obligated to provide water?
Yeah, one of the bigger challenges is, and as we look at annexation, because potential for us to annex portions of the county that have county water supplies, they're going to continue to be on county water because it's the cost of changeover would be exponential that the city couldn't afford to do, and it wouldn't even be worth annexation. So what you're saying is, once they're in our system, they're in our system. I mean, for them to change out would be astronomical for them to go into county water, unless county built pipes right next to us and decided that they wanted to compete for that utility, which I don't think they want to do.
And then if they're outside of the city, do they pay the same water rates that are inside the city?
25% upcharge.
There is upcharge. Okay. So could that be an incentive for them to be annexed?
100%.
To give them a
Yeah.
regular
Actually,
rate?
state's looking to take that away. So
Could we up the ante and say we're going to discontinue water if you don't annex?
no, can't do that.
You can't remove
Where's
their
it?
utility.
Who says that?
I'm sure the state says that.
Yeah.
Once you provide the utility, you have to continue to provide the utility. Unless
we still benefit from the utility, so I don't want to get rid of the utility.
yeah, we're making money off it, so
Yes,
it's okay.
we are.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of to strengthen the package offering to
Well,
them.
and that's the important piece, and that becomes part of the strategy. That's where city manager and team, we all get together and we build that. You know, why is it important to be part of Fort Ridge? Because you know, the reality of it is if you look at their own county taxes, they're paying 7 to 10%. They come to Fort Ritchie, they're going to pay 13%. So how do I offset that cost in their mind to the benefits they get? You know, as being a member of the city. One, you get a fire department that's dedicated that can provide you rapid service as opposed to county services. I beat county services by 4 minutes every time. I've got an on location police department, professional, ready, rapid, easily deploy. They're there. Matter of fact, if you're a business owner, guess what we do every evening? I've got my law enforcement officers going out and checking all your businesses to make sure that they're locked and secured, nobody's trying to rob. That's for a business point of view. For our residents, you know, what are we providing our residents? You've got to look at that. You know, part of our CRA development, and if CRA continues and we're able to expand that, you know, if they become part of that development piece that falls into the CRA development, they're going to see projects and development in their areas. You know, being a part of our community, guess what? All those roads that were neglected, and you got, you know, areas that are really bad. Hey, guess what? Now that you belong to a city, we now have responsibility for your infrastructure, your support, and the repair. So guess what? Somebody's going to have to come out here and take a look at this and eventually fix this. So it takes a lot of the burden of what they have and helps that. And I'll tell you an example. A previous job I had, we were very efficient at hurricane recovery. So efficient that we were the first ones complete after the hurricanes occurred by months.
Wow.
But the problem was is everybody around me was unincorporated. And then they were like, hey, how come you haven't come to pick up my stuff yet? And I said, well, it's because you're not a resident. But if we decide to annex, we would love to come pick up your stuff. So it was a benefit to them to become a part of the city just because of the hurricane damage and the resources we put in place for recovery for them. And it was like, hey, when you hear this being mentioned, remember, you want to vote into this because when something bad happens to you, I've got your back and I'll take care of you.
In those unincorporated areas where we already are supplying water, can we legally deny adding any additional water for developments in those areas unless they become annexed?
You could have an agreement. I mean, if somebody doesn't have water today, but they want to have water tomorrow, you could have a policy that says, in order to, I'm pretty sure that's how those agreements work, right?
I think the code already has that language that if they have the water, they agree to, same circle, they agree to be annexed, but we can't annex them until they're contiguous,
Unless
right?
we created a moratorium to stop without and having putting that in place pending agreements with each individual developer under review. And none of that language is in the code. So basically, if someone was to develop tomorrow, we're obligated to provide them that service. If we're the closest line and the city of Port Richey can provide to that customer, then we need to do that. I mean, by law, we would have to, unless we put something in place in writing saying that we're going to do this starting moving forward because of the demand. If the demand now becomes an issue, which this has happened in other places, but I believe Brooksville is already in the process of establishing it. And Zephyr Hills has had an issue with it before.
Well, Zephyr Hills has already stopped any residential permits at all.
Yeah, so they're already under that because they're exceeded demand. So and the thing is that getting back to what we talked about earlier, usually when a developer comes to the table, we'll ask them for flow analysis, stuff like that, on top of what we're already doing in our numbers. So the thing is that we're only permitted to pump out, to pump so much a month. We can't exceed that by law, by the permit that the city has. We can't go past that. So even if we have the water in our wells, we're only allowed to go up to what our permit requires. Right now, we're under that. So, and I don't think that any recent development is going to cause a major change in that. But it will become a problem. It will become something if it continues to expand. So we'd have to definitely look into something in the future.
Can the city council go ahead and set that moratorium that you just suggested, so that if you're not part of our city, we don't have to honor tapping into our water supply because of the demand and the future demand we will have?
I'm sure they'd have to go, consult with legal to make sure if
And
they're
moratoriums aren't just
do that.
to stop something. Moratorium is to pause while you actively investigate, research, analyze what you're doing. So it wouldn't just be, we're not doing it. It would be, we're not doing it, and here's all the studies we're going to do and whatever needs to be done, which is obviously going out to bid, paying contracts, hiring experts that can analyze those issues. So until you're ready to do that, you don't even talk moratorium.
There's also two issues that we need to address. One, capability for that growth. Do we still have the capability as we expand? And that's one of the things we're going to have to look at in the near future. Because if we're very successful, we're going to outrun our water plant. It's just going to happen. But in the same breath, as there's communities that need water, that's a utility fee that we collect. So, to turn it off, that you're tying my hands by saying, you can't have that money, which, the city desperately needs, every bit of revenue that it can obtain. Now, I would like to be able to get that revenue with a certificate of, hey, annexation, once we are able to get you within our contiguous lines. That's the end state. And so it'll be real easy to bring you in. But our utilities do bring in a significant amount of funding that supports the city. So, I really wouldn't want to turn anybody away, because when it comes to no more tax, no more ad valorem tax or property tax available, in certain price ranges, at least I have services of, water services that are at least supplementing some of that cost.
I guess I'm misunderstanding, because We also service water well outside the city, all the way up to
Yeah.
52. Are you saying currently that those properties that are taking our water that's outside the city are geographically separated from the city?
Yes.
Yes.
So there's a line of geography that prevents us from being able to annex any of those.
Yes. Right now.
It's a
Oh, yeah.
substantial line. It's a substantial line. There's a lot of properties between that.
So and we don't have an outside the city water customer that's abutting city property. I find it hard to believe.
No, we do have that too, but there's a lot outside of that as well, right?
There may,
So-
Both.
without looking directly in a map, there might be, but like right now, we were just talking about that there are properties right now within the city that are county, and to take care of all of those, annex those properties in first, and then begin expanding your outer circle. Now there may be where, as far as we go north, our border line is like where the Red Lobster used to be.
Mhm.
That's our most northern line, like where that restaurant was. Could we?
Do we service water to that Firestone dealer or whatever it is, right?
Yeah, we service water everything on the west corridor, going all the way up.
Right, so that's what I'm saying.
To Ranch Road.
That's
just
contiguous.
north of Ranch Road is what we service. So
Yeah. So that's contiguous. And if so, we have agreement in place. What they took our water service that they would annex in, it seemed like we could get those at any time if that's valid still. Because
yeah, but you would have to start with the immediate property that's
Absolutely.
right on our border.
and again, in line, water
And they
line is connected physically all the way through there.
Yeah, and then continue, but you'd have to annex those properties and work and stay continuous.
Yeah.
If I'm correct, work your way up.
You can't be linear, you can't run down the street, you have to it has to be
Yeah.
a reasonably compact area. So you build, but for instance, back in the day, City of Clearwater ran up US 19 to countryside, and they used US 19. So there's rules about what's reasonably compact, but
Well, right, but I think given it again, I think that's probably separate from a utility agreement that you've already established that you will annex in. You shouldn't have to take everything around it if it's right.
you just have
There.
to be contiguous.
Yeah.
Right.
We have
It
to
just has
touch
to
it.
be touching, has to be.
I think we have that situation. We need to look at that.
In some areas, we do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Some areas.
I have a question. I don't know who would answer it. So, has the city looked close enough at the financial benefit of annexing a piece of property? Would they have some kind of a pretty good idea of what additional revenue would come in, and then using that information, could we possibly offer a piece of property owner and a financial incentive? Even like half price on your property taxes for a year or 5 years or something like that. Is there,
Well,
that
I think that's something that we would have to work with, because right now that state, we're in a state of flux right now, especially with the governor and everything. Because if you look at the 203 properties that touch us that we want to enclave, that physically would come and be annexed, their median price is under $200,000.
Right.
So if you look at 50,000 and 150,000 being non-taxable, revenue to us next year, the year after, am I really getting anything out of that, or am I just generating space at this point? Mm-hmm. So it's hard to say right now for me to give you an honest answer on what the cost would be. But when I looked at Little Massachusetts to Little to 52 to West, that was $9 billion in taxable property tax. And so I looked at that and I said, okay, what that percentage is, and it came, a couple $100 million that would came back to the city that we would have invested ourselves in. But what's that cost to us, and is that enough? What does that mean to us, and does that help us provide the services and everything that we need to do if we did incorporate all that space? But to be able to give you the specifics right now would be very challenging, and I'd be wrong. I'd be wrong on my first swing.
I think the focus needs to shift from a value standpoint on let me help you save money because we're going to give you a discount. We shifted, just using real estate for example. I literally have customers that I show houses in the city of Port Richey, and I tout what our services are and what they get for that difference. Because the first thing it says is, well, if I go buy a house on West Shore and Gulf Harbors, I'll pay 7%. But if I go buy a house on Harborpointe, I'm paying 13%. What do I get? Well, you get a fire department that responds faster. You get a police department that actually shows up. You get, you get a building department where you can walk in and talk to a person.
Yeah.
You have all those things that there's a value add, and you have to push the value add. The same thing with annexation. The guy across the street, he's like, great, I'm already paying the water bill. I'd like to go ahead and annex the property in there so that property's covered for my tenants in case there's a fire. Well, we're going to respond anyway because it's close to us.
Yes.
I get that, but we don't have a responsibility to respond to him. And he wanted that being put on him. The problem was, of course, he walked in the door and he says, well, it's $10,000 a join to add to the services. There was a disconnect. I couldn't cross that chasm. But for the average person that we're going to go after, we have to push what they're getting from us by having us as a city.
Right.
So
it did boil down to the money. It sounds like.
well, then the money
What if we
because
offered
this,
to them for $5,000?
I agree. Well, that was a services issue. It wasn't a taxable issue. You're talking about taxes. He was more than willing to pay the difference in taxes for the services. We had to connect them to our water supply. To our sewer system, and that just didn't work for him. After he just wrote a check for $9,000 to fix this.
But why do we have to?
Because that's the rule. And Veronica was following the rules. She said, unfortunately, to annex, you got to join. You got to be.
Can't we make a variance on that so we can bring these people in? I've got the same thing. I've got a property up on Sander Drive, right up in 19. I have Port Richey water. I have a Port Richey address, but I am in the county, and that whole community over there is all septic, no matter how you look at it.
Right.
And because of, it's one of my houses over there, you're talking about a house in the $140,000 range. Trying to come up with $10,000 to do a hookup is egregious to anything that we'd have to be able to get out of it for most of that community. Can we offer variances on those things to allow them to say, hey, you're grandfathered in, you have it, as long as it's serviceable, you don't have to change. You're getting our water already. You're getting Duke Energy already. Why are we going to have to force you to put into our sewer system?
It wouldn't be. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
It wouldn't be a variance in the legal sense of a variance. That's not what that would qualify for. We could look at whether the code can be changed. There may be a state statute that requires connections. I'd have to look into that. If it's just a code, a city preference code provision, maybe that's something you can modify. We would have to look at that.
Because I know across the state of Florida, that's going to be a problem set anywhere, any county that you're in Florida, because most of your communities outside, they get their water from somewhere, but they're all in septic. It's just a fact. So how do you get them, and how do you make them inclusive? Well, that may come back that we may have to look at some of our policy. We may have to look at the state, see where the state provides variance with communities that are in county that are looking at incorporation, because I'm sure there's a law there, and then looking at how we evolve that into our annexation strategy to be able to make it inclusive, even if it says, hey, you got 10 years to be on city water. To be plugged into the sewer system, because that's basically what it comes down to. Is you've already got the water, but you're plugging into the sewer system unless you're on a well.
Right. Or is there a special assessment they could pay over the next year? Something like that. Yeah. There's ways to modify.
Yes, there's ways to modify.
So the problem was that at that juncture, staff was limited. Their hands were tied. Said, unfortunately, this is the process, and the customer didn't want to look any further. So, but if I went to him tomorrow and said, hey, we've worked through it, would you like to annex the property? He'll sign tomorrow.
But I think what you've got now is you've got a council that's creative.
Right.
That's got that mindset that, there's opportunity in everything that we do, and I think they see that, and it just comes down to, how we develop that opportunity for that annexation when we have situations like that, because everything's doable.
Right.
It's just how much risk you want to take in order to make that, and is that risk worth the benefit, once we accomplish, that strategic goal we're going after. And I think at the end of the day, I think it will. When you finally get the annexation and you get the contiguous design of what Port Richey should be for the area that it's in, I think the benefits are going to be tenfold.
Correct. See, from a policy perspective, on annexation policy, couldn't that be written in there as far as, because you could have business uses like a gentleman's club. We don't allow them in the city now. We've got one right north of us. If they were to annex that business in, obviously they wouldn't be able to come in with our current code, couldn't annex that annexation policy take care of those things like the business type and all different things that were outside of our code.
I don't
That's
think
right.
I understand the question.
Well, if you annex something in
Right,
that doesn't fit,
right.
right? Also, you're
Make
bringing
some
it
kind
in.
of an exception for if you're being annexed.
Right. If you're part of an
Wow.
annexation, sewer, if you have sewer, you're accepted.
That's what I said, we could look into that. I don't know, there may be state requirements that don't allow that.
I don't know. I don't know. You have to change your code in order to
Yeah.
annex.
Right.
Well, no, but if and that's what, if the policy that your client ran into was a internal, this building policy, obviously that can be looked at. If it was something in the code policy, that can be looked at. And the ultimate question is it something coming down from the state that's requiring it?
Right.
And once we have that answer, then staff.
Well, there's a very
can work with
specific
it.
answer to
Yes.
a
Well, we
case
can
study
get
to
the
work
answer.
on.
I just
Right
don't,
there.
my computer
I mean,
doesn't.
I know what you guys
have
talking
before
about.
any annexation happens, you
Oh,
have
you
to
do?
have
Yeah, I'm
some kind of
aware.
provision in place to
Yeah.
handle those things. There's going to be
I'm trying to
exceptions.
look down the road.
Wasn't there a state requirement at some point to bring in sewer along the waterfront?
I know. I feel like there's some state issues within this conversation. I just don't have, my computer died on us and I don't know off the top of my head. So we'll look into it.
But this was to get you guys started and comfortable with the process. So with the voluntary portions of it that are currently available to the city, that with council approval and everything, that we can start executing the expansion. And then as we learn as we go, because this is going to be a learn as we go process, because this is the first time the city's grown since its inception. So what it'll allow us to do is, as we do get these opportunities, we're going to see it all unfold, and hopefully it unfolds exactly as we map it out. And that's our job is to make sure for council and for you guys that we're mapping it out, strategically so that it's successful as we move along, so that there's no real big hiccups. And if there are, we bring the hiccups to you. You guys tell us which direction you want to go and make the adjustments.
I mean, I think that the benefits outweigh massively from a commercial and industrial standpoint for those people that are in those type of properties, and they'll fall like dominoes once we get the first one lined out correctly. So residential is a tougher issue, but serviceability, especially if there were agreements in place, like Tammy said, if it's contiguous, which is what we have to get to, I think we're okay.
I think with the tax thing, it could possibly pass too. I think that, I mean, it's twofold, right? Do we want them because they're not going to be accretive? It's going to be a service drag, but they're going to be less apprehensive of joining because they're going to want those services because they're not paying for it anyway, right? So I think that probably helps from annexation from growth, but.
And look at the county's increasing their taxes anyway, so.
Right.
Eventually, we're going to be pretty much married up.
How fast can we override this septic tank issue? Because he's got clients who'll jump right in. I mean, that's something.
I think
They look at it and figure out it's ready to go. I'll sign
I
that
think
deal.
There
We need to
will,
look at the statute.
there will be an answer. I just need a computer that's working in time to look at it.
Because typically, it's a state goal to get
Yes, that's,
properties off of
Yeah.
septic.
and I think that's going to
100%.
be your problem. I have a feeling that there's going to be some state.
I think the road paving is a big selling point because in the
Oh, yeah.
county it's assessed and in the city it's not.
And they don't get it.
And also the police and fire is a huge incentive. And like Embassy area, they have a lot of crime in that area. They would love to have police and fire more readily available.
I'd like to go slowly to that one so that I got my services increase, I can take that on.
Exactly. No, agreed, 100%. Okay, great.
All right, do you need anything else, either of you? All right, then. Call it. My agenda's dead.
I will entertain any other motions as we near 3:30.
Motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, guys. I know it was a long one, but we had a lot to catch up on.
Pee, and I don't-
It's been a minute since we were
Right
here.
there.
We were doing so good.